Greetings. We're going to be talking about the highlights of 2020. And we're not going to mention COVID. We're not going to talk about sequestering. We're not going to talk about sheltering in place, the government, politics, or any of that. It turns out that stem cells are one of the highlights of this year. So there's been some amazing things in research and real progress, both on the clinical side and the research side. So we're going to look at the research side today, and then in the new year, I'm going to give some insights on what's happening with the politics and the clinical part. So I'm Dr. Thomas Santucci. I'm the clinical director of Advanced Regen. My first license was a chiropractor, and then I went into functional medicine and then functional neurology, and now we're doing regenerative medicine. So the world of research and actually clinical activity in general has greatly expanded in 2020. There's estimated to be 45,000 stem cell procedures a year. So the United States just tipped 110,000 total stem cell transplants. And again, all without no adverse medical events. So this is turning out to be a really, really safe kind of thing to do. Stem cell procedures are estimated at over $1 billion a year. So this is a thing that's happening. There's a potential to replace the pharmaceutical research and development market by up to 25% in every drug market. So this is going to be arguably the next revolution in medicine. The frontiers are eyesight, cancer, neurocognitive issues, and diabetes. And if you look at it, the research really did a good job of kind of earmarking the new stuff. So when I first got my medical training, there was, don't get diabetes, don't get heart disease. And because it's a lot easier to combat those things in a preventative way than it is to deal with them after you've actually manifested. Well, now in 2021, we now have to worry about macular degeneration. Why? Because we replaced all our light bulbs with LEDs. So the LEDs are actually a blue light, even though they look really white, and they actually destroy our maculas. So you look at the bulletproof guys, and they got these, orange glasses that look like, some kind of money counter in the mafia or something. But those orange glasses actually filter out the blue light and protect the macula, which is the inner part of the back part of the eye. So we now have to worry about macular degeneration, and we now have to worry about neurocognitive diseases on a level we never did before. So Alzheimer's is going to be an epidemic. The problem with Alzheimer's is that it's going to manifest the symptoms 10 years after the damage has already occurred. So with stem cells, it can come in and actually make some changes at the brain level. Lastly, talking about diabetes. Diabetes is an epidemic that just didn't seem to have, anybody that really had their hands around it. In a lot of these situations, we think there's a clinical part of this, is a lifestyle part of this that adds to the research part of this. But you're going to see the research is very, very favorable for coming in and modifying stem cells to specifically deal with these issues. So, by way of background or review for most of you, stem cells are the raw material that all the body's differentiated cells are made from. So in an omnipotent or a totipotent stem cell, there's a lot of vocabulary, but that one stem cell can produce 122 different kinds of cells. So they give rise to brain cells, nerve cells, heart cells, pancreatic cells, etc. One of the things that the research people are allowed to do is they're allowed to take statements like this and the next one that basically says, why are they so special, and run with it. So stem cells have the potential to replace every single cell in your body. A spinal cord, an eye, a pancreas, a liver, all of these things that on the clinical side, we can just say it's really hopeful. Stem cells replicate themselves over and over. So what does that mean? So if you have 5 million stem cells, arguably it could become 100 billion stem cells of different types. So some copies of itself and some copies of the target tissue, which remember, stem cells are chemotaxically targeted, which means they're going to go after injured and inflamed tissue. So basically, when we begin to understand at a tissue level, meaning I'm going to fix the aorta of a heart, or I'm going to fix a gallbladder, if I modify those stem cells, again, something that we're not allowed to do commercially, but on the research level, if I get, a research grant to modify those specific stem cells, I could go in and change tissue very, very, very efficiently. So this is an amazingly good thing and a positive thing for the world. So what diseases can be cured? And I wouldn't use the word cured, but it's kind of interesting. So we pulled a lot of this data from the international market. So this is an Indian doctor who's really pretty clever. And he's using direct words like cured. In the United States, we never say something like that. We would totally fly under the radar and say symptoms can be lessened and, pro-inflammatory, pro-regenerative mediators can be upregulated. But he's basically saying any disease in which there's tissue degeneration is a potential candidate for stem cell therapies. Pretty brave statements. When we look at these details, and the thing that always gets me is that the people that do kind of the light level, internet review always find the guy who was almost blinded 20 years ago, and you see people who really don't know very much about this, like citing that. I'm going to cite something else. So this is a clinical study in Moorfield Eye Hospital in London, where surgeons restored the sight of 6 stem cell patients with a certain kind of the wet macular degeneration, so the age-related macular degeneration. In the United States, this is totally considered an incurable condition. So the successful research criteria was put together. They followed it to the T. 6 people have their eyes restored by basically coming in and producing very, very specific stem cells that replace the cornea with limbal stem cells. All of these people have full sight again. So when we're looking at these kind of conditions, we can see that the researchers are being very, very conservative. At the end of that study, they basically came up with the conclusion that you see at the end of all studies, and that more study is required. So we have to remember that, even though they do an amazing amount of good, research is an industry. So it's a self-perpetuating industry, and there's always another question. So I don't think I've ever seen a piece of stem cell research that didn't end with, while positive, we need more research on this subject. So it's a very conservative bunch, and there's an argument for and against that. I personally think if you can fix wet macular degeneration in 6 people, that you should do it in 600 people, and then 6,000 people, and then 6 million people, rather than say more research is required. But that's how it's done. Now, it's interesting that all the big breakthroughs are not in the United States. All the big breakthroughs are in India, or they're in this case London, or they're in Eastern Europe, or they're in Japan, or they're in Sweden, or they're in Switzerland. And a lot of this has to do with a basic conservative attitude toward new medicine in general, but also toward stem cells. So when we look at the progress in these other areas where we're looking at neurodegenerative diseases, we're looking at spinal cord issues, look at heart disease, burn therapy, and diabetes, most of this research is not US based. So again, this is an Indian doctor kind of presenting what the world looks like. And we're much more likely to get the innovation from, other countries right now. So when we're treating neurologic diseases, this is something that we've done a lot of work on. And in the day, we were doing brain scans and doing brain mapping and trying to get alpha, theta, beta waves balanced in people with Alzheimer's. So you would, test for neurotransmitters. You'd try like heck to decrease neural inflammation. And so Alzheimer's has a very specific kind of tissue that can be affected, and it's really these neurons. So there's a deposition of plaque. So the beta amyloid plaque, it looks like cholesterol in the brain, but it's not cholesterol. And then the actual tertiary structure of the dendrites, so it's called the tau protein structure within this, and it creates like a wrinkling, if you will. And so it looks like these blotchy plaques and then this destroyed amyloid tissue here. So, and in either case, this is something that was pretty well sequestered. It was in the brain itself. We didn't know how to decrease the inflammation. We didn't really understand the underlying triggers. On the stem cell side, again, there's the possibility that you can modify the stem cell to go after the target tissue. So again, something we can't do clinically. But clinically, you could address the underlying cause. So when you look at this thing and you go, wow, could we put stem cells in the brain? The answer is with intranasal stem cells, we could do that 2 or 3 years ago. And so what can happen here, and I think it's really a positive statement, is that we're looking to getting these specialized stem cells created, but then we're also looking at doing what we can do today. And we think in 5 years, 10 years, the clinical part and the research part will be merged into pretty effective therapies for these things that are considered incurable. So we're looking at the possibility of modifying these stem cells to deliver substance to the brain to stop the cells from dying, increasing function. So stem cells, again, can go in, and here's our amyloid plaque, and then here's our what's called our tangles, neurofibril tangles, which is a deformation of the proteins within the actual nerve. And stem cells could be attracted to it because of the inflammation and the damage, and it actually replace the tissue. Again, if we look at underlying cause, I would always look at metals, I would always look at systemic inflammation, I would always look at brain neurotransmitter imbalances. But if we could add specialized stem cell therapy to this, I think we could do something with Alzheimer's. The research is supporting that. Parkinson's disease is a debilitating disease that we notice the motor part of this. So what happens is the patient goes into flexion. Remember, extension is kind of evolutionary. As man got more and more capable, he stood up more and more straight. And so, a good, tight abdominal structure with shoulders that are back and head that is up is a signal of an evolved human being. This is definitely neocortical damage. And in this particular case, we know where that tissue is. So it's the so-called substantia nigra. So it's a part of the brain that comes up being dark colored on the scans. And the substantia nigra is a part of a system of motor control. And when the person loses control of the substantia nigra, or there's damage in that area, there's a rigidity to the motion. So the person can have resting tremors, fenestrating gait, which is that shuffling gait that causes them not to deaccelerate, and in general, this cogwheel rigidity when they go to do things. It's considered an incurable disease. All of these are considered incurable diseases, but it's almost like, in 5 years, we don't really think that we're not going to be able to do something with stem cells and with the advanced clinical work that's being done. So when we're looking at Parkinson's, again, this substantia nigra, so in a healthy brain, we've got, these mesencephalic areas controlling things. This is the substantia nigra here, and we don't have any kind of firing on this side. It's interesting, in this particular brain, there isn't a lot of brain recession. So this is not a dementia, this is a specific targeting of a specific tissue. Whenever we have specific tissue, we're talking about being able to reprogram cells to go in and address this. This particular research project used adult stem cells. In general, we think the mesenchymal stem cells and umbilical stem cells are going to take over everything because of their extra virulence, because of their freshness, if you will. They're not senescent, and because of the easy access. We don't think that a Parkinson's patient should go through an extraction of stem cells from fat or bone marrow or even PRP if you can just get them off the shelf from an umbilical cord. Multiple sclerosis, I remember in medical school being taught that it's the great imposter. And multiple sclerosis essentially scleroses or destroys the myelin sheath, that it's an accelerator around the axons of each one of the part of the nerves. And, this is one of those things where, it can affect anything. So it's a class of symptoms. But multiple sclerosis is a particularly insidious dementia because almost by definition, from a neuro point of view, we say that you can't do anything about it. And that's always a bad place to start. So when we're looking at this gets classified, in my opinion, as an idiopathic autoimmune disease. So our own immune system, our own white blood cells, natural killer cells, are actually attacking our own nerves. So it's a massive autoimmune disruption. It's a communication problem within the body, within the cells. So one of the things that stem cells do is they decrease inflammation and they balance out the immune system. As recently as, let's say, 10 years ago, medical authorities were warning that effective, reliable treatments for neurologic diseases like MS were really far in the future. And, a few years later, the US succeeded in treating mice with MS neurologic conditions. And sometimes these cells, are pretty, there's good parallels between some of the test animals and humans. Sometimes they're not. There's a big research thing that says people aren't mice. But in this particular case, I think it's okay. So basically, we fixed, we can grow some of these conditions in test tubes at this point, or pie plates, and then we can actually remedy the destruction of the myelin within that tissue. So it's pretty amazing. So we're in the human clinical trial stage, and all these test results are really very positive. One of the things that I would add parenthetically is that the clinical approach absolutely needs to consider the triggers, the environmental exposures, and the autoimmune concomitants. The fact that these things have increased in prevalence so much in the last 20 years really speaks to the foods, the gluten, dairy, egg, yeast, soy, and the metals and the chemical exposures. So again, when we're looking at this, so in this particular study, they nailed it. And they said that MS occurs when antibodies target self-myelin antigens causing demyelination. So that's a lot further along than we don't know where it comes from. It's at least identifying it as an autoimmune disease. So, they're using intravenous injection. They're using mesenchymal stem cells, and they're trying to get it into brain lesions. When we're looking at some of the newer techniques, you can go intranasal and deliver, in this case, umbilical cord stem cells into a brain. You'd probably get a significantly higher rate of proliferation. But even in using these techniques, the results reveal the injection of mesenchymal stem cells decrease disease severity and improves quality of life. So what do you have to do that? You have to decrease brain inflammation and change along this cascade of the things that can change to make a neuron fire better. And in the brain, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Exercise increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and what we think is that the signaling molecules within stem cells and within exosomes and within Wharton's jelly can all facilitate this and get new brain neuron growth. So again, we're looking at umbilical cord stem cells being the most attractive option because they're easy to get, they don't have ethical dilemmas, and the pluripotent or the omnipotent capability means they can create the different cell types that would be necessary to repair a brain. So we get a lot of questions on diabetes. The literature is, I think, jumped the gun a little bit on, can stem cells cure diabetes? Diabetes is a complex kind of social, metabolic, psycho condition. So in my opinion, a lot of times we're talking about fixing an end organ. So, this is the pancreas. The pancreas has beta cells in it that create insulin. So we overuse the pancreas by having too starchy or too sugary a diet over years, and then kind of blame it as a shutdown of the organ. It's a little bit like thyroid disease. In both cases, the brain is telling these rather, subject organs what to do. So in this particular case, I think if we come in with, a more comprehensive viewpoint of what's going on with, blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, and then literally what's going on with food intake and exercise, in addition to what's going on with stem cells, we can do something here. The rehab world kind of rocked the diabetes world by saying that, at the end of a 4-day intermittent fast, the beta cells could spontaneously reassert themselves. So now if we can target stem cells that, in this case, they're saying tweaking the way in which the developed cells produce the beta cells, we can make beta cells more responsive to glucose levels in the blood. Researchers found that when they transplanted the new cells into mice that did not produce insulin, the cells began secreting the hormone within a few days, and it helped the animal control the animal's blood sugar for months. So there's very little question that stem cells are going to be able to help with diabetes. Whether this is going to be a magic pill that reverses the way sugar handling stress and pre-diabetic, post-diabetic conditions are handled is a huge question. But I think that there really is a very, very, very hopeful future for the neurometabolic conditions, as long as we add the clinical part to it. So we're sort of talking about research here, and so when we're looking at the research, I think that there's 3 encapsulations that we have to kind of say is going on with stem cells. Research is capable of looking at the true potential of really modified stem cells. When we're talking about most research, they're talking about a stem cell to come in and create an atrial valve. We're talking about, making new beta cells. We're talking about a new cancer combating cell. We're talking about, something that is very specific to a target. It's almost like a physical kind of an answer. There's been very little done on autoimmunity. There's been very little done on longevity. We think those are the next levels that are going to happen, because we know that, those are the characteristics of stem cells, that they are anti-inflammatory, autoimmune modulatory, anti-apoptotic, and they modify really the aging parts of DNA. So we think that all that is in the future. For right now, it's pretty much looking at modifying stem cells for specific applications. And then without doubt or without an exception, there isn't a stem cell research article that I've read that properly included the clinical insights. And part of it is because they're so busy creating these new molecules, and no criticism. But I think once we get that new molecule and put it in a clinical environment where people are able to address, let's say, the triggers of autoimmune disease or the other factors or the person's general health in as a whole, an integrated approach is going to get us a severe acceleration of positive outcomes. In general, research is coming off with a conservative approach. We have the study where they fixed 5 people's eyesight, and at the end of it, they said they're going to do more research, and it's still, basically experimental. I think that there's a certain level of that's good. I think there's a requirement for expediency in the market at this point, not just that people want them. I think that, we've got these fast-acting new conditions like Alzheimer's, like macular degeneration, that require a faster response. So while respecting safety and to some degree the tenets of conservative research, I think that, we can look to some of these things to politically be activated and have the United States time frame look a lot more like other, responsible countries. So the research is positive. We're going in the right direction. After the holidays, we're going to come back and share some perspective on what's going on clinically. The likely direction of FDA approvals. Most of you know we're in our 3rd year of FDA approval for basic stem cell usage in the United States. We're going to be talking about clinical breakthroughs. They're still within the guise that we're all allowed to work. There's some amazing things being done. And then basically what you can do to use stem cells, not just now, but in the future. And two things. I always think that information comes with it a responsibility for action. And it's interesting to talk to people because they can either give a talk like this or they just really have no kind of information at all. So if you can share this with people, that would just be a really great thing. Again, this isn't a mercantile thing, and we're going to limit our offers to one a month. But one of the things we're doing this month is we're basically telling people that we want you to take action. We want you to save money. We want you to kind of be your own best advocate. And so we looked at it and said, we want an active December, which we're having. And so we're giving 20% off for stem cells for you and a friend in December. So it's our little Christmas gift to you. And I think it's something that can make a difference, in your health during these times when there's not a lot of other great options. Okay. It's been a great experience going through this year. I hope next year isn't quite so experiential, and we're looking to seeing all of you in a healthier 2021.